Hi, I'm Bob Anderson, and I'm a member of this church, retired minister, and also an artist. And so part of my work in this church has been to take our very natural gallery here and make it into an art venue for the island, for island artists and art events. So the idea of this particular show, which was held from October through December of '25, started by my seeing the work of Kit Moshenko, who was an island artist for many years and was famous for doing all kinds of combinations with found objects. And I thought he hadn't gotten a lot of publicity on this island, and he died a couple of years ago, and there was a fire at his gallery, and people managed to save a lot of his work. And so we were able to start thinking about this show around how to honor the work of Kit Moshenko. So here he is working in his studio, and we have a bio here, but these four pieces are probably typical of the work he did, putting the oddest of objects together to create art creations. This one I know is called Dark Eyes, but as you know, the title of any particular work of art is totally arbitrary in the mind of the artist anyway. So the names aren't important, but what intrigues me is the way he was able to take an old spade with rust spots in it, and an old tin, and pieces of sheep shears, and frames of probably a stove, and wood from the beaches that he salvaged. He had a studio on the island full of this kind of material and put it together in this kind of way. So the show really was a tribute to Kit Moshenko for his time on our island. And almost everybody knew him and loved him. As we put the show together, I said, there has to be some kind of piece that's kind of has some fun, make some fun of the show. So I decided we should put together something about contemporary masking, because masking is something that's very much on everybody's mind the last few years. So it seemed to me that if we had a key person in our country who was not masked, surrounded by all the kinds of people, leaders, people from the arts world, people from the governing world, the native world, the historic foundations of our country, that we had the makings of a fun piece that could kind of let people chuckle at this show. I put together a few signs like seasonal masks or indigenous masks or theater masks to show the different ways that masks have been used traditionally, because they're all over the world. This particular focus is on mainly the seasonal stuff we use for things like Halloween, for Beaux-Arts balls, for European festivals, where the mask is sometimes held in front of the eyes on a stick and sometimes worn to cover the face. Some of these are meant to go with costumes. This was made to go with a costume. This was an all-white costume for Halloween. Some of them were just to be animal shapes, animal faces. This was part of a spirit mask. It's all in lace. This is, of course, the very typical kind of mask that was used at Beaux-Arts balls in Europe. That one and this one, which is shared by someone on the island. This is a painted mask. Many people have a face painting tradition as their art form. And this one was painted at Burning Man, not by me, but by someone. It's a photograph of mine. Some of them are half masks. Some of them are, this was done by my nephew. It's a kind of old-fashioned pin-up doll. What's it called, a pin-up doll?
Paper
doll.
Paper doll.
Kind of mask, okay. It's sort of made of fine, just found objects, cardboard and things. So Halloween masks and seasonal masks can be made of all kinds of kind of objects. And this is a chance to show the range of that. And because a lot of people asked for a workshop on making masks, because I make a lot of them and I would teach a mask making workshop, but we never got around to finding the place or time to do that. But so I laid out some of the ways that we go about making a mask by using a mask form from the local party store, or making sketches and clay paper mash that can be used to build the form, how to sketch out in a larger design. That's the sketch for this owl mask. And then we'll say more later about the Green Man mask. Found out also Green Man is also an orange man, so here was an unfinished mask in clay that's being painted, but it's not finished yet. So this was just to give people an idea about how to go about making a mask if you wanted to do that. From sketches from Mayan mosaic masks and Mayan clay masks of their gods, and we'll have more of those as we get into the next gallery. This piece by Leo Osborne, who is a resident of our island and nationally known, depicts a hidden face, which raises questions that are endemic to the show itself, is what are you hiding from, or what are you pretending to be? Why are you looking at the world this way? And it's a question we can ask for all of the pieces that are in the show. These four masks are about the theme of the Green Man, which appears heavily in Renaissance and earlier classic art paintings, where there was this figure, this face of a man in the foliage of, that you had to kind of look to see it, in the foliage of the scenery. And he was known as the Green Man, also was sometimes called the consort of the goddess, and also sometimes thought of as just simply a spirit of nature, and then sometimes a Pan or Dionysus figure. So it's definitely a clearly pagan figure. These two are just generally Green Man masks in clay. This one is a sketch of a Green Man face that appears in one of the most Catholic of shrines in southern Spain, in the white cities of southern Spain. Here is this Catholic shrine with all of the crutches and the votive things that people leave as response to prayer and so on, all the prayer tags and the bones and the stuff. As Catholic a shrine as you want, in the middle of it is this totally pagan symbol, which I sketched on site. And all I could think of was, where was quality control when this shrine was being put together? Because this should not be there, but it amused me. But also, this is a photograph someone took for me of the leg of a table in St. Philip Neri Church in Oaxaca. It's part of two tables which support huge statues of Jesus and the Virgin Mary to either side of the altar. Again, why is, obviously he's the Green Man because he's got all this vegetation growing out of him. And it's a three-way mask, and it's on every leg of these tables that support religious votive figures that are 6 feet tall. So masks appear in very strange places, and for reasons that are sometimes totally mysterious. This is a wearable mask, believe it or not. And I call it a Venus mask, but it really isn't a depiction of Venus, which is one of the major celestial elements in the Mayan cosmology. But this is a mask I made in order to show Venus symbols that appear on tombs and other places in Mayan country. This face has a flower on the side, which is typically appears as a Venus symbol. This symbol of the bell with the two arches is a Mayan symbol, and this three-way thing with a kind of a feathery design in it. So there's these three symbols that I just simply put together on this one mask, just to show symbols that always, when you see them, always relate to the goddess Venus. I want to show you what you could do with it, because this is a wearable mask. Okay, stop. Okay. In a small tomb and in its museum in a little town called San Juan El Mogote, which is a half-hour bus drive northwest of Oaxaca, Mexico, are these figures, probably the oldest pieces in the show. These pot faces were common in that culture 1000 BC. And I was intrigued by the fact that these braziers or pots to carry water were done as heads of people. So to me, they're appropriate in the mask show. This is a mask, a sgraffito mask in clay in the museum in Puerto Vallarta. Sgraffito is the drawing in lines and faces and on bodies, scarifying, making scars of pieces like this. So in some cultures, scarring of the human body as part of the masking process is quite common. So this is an example of that. At Edzna, near Campeche on the west coast of the Yucatan, is a place where they have huge stone mask types. They're probably this tall and this wide, and at the end of two long walls is sunset and sunrise. I forget which one this is. So these are just sketches of these very large faces made of large boulder stones and so on, and cemented into the wall. In Campeche, I'm sorry, this is near Campeche, near Calakmul, which is the major city on the Gulf side of the Yucatan, the west side of the Yucatan. Inside that dense jungle are some sites I've not been to yet, but this is the corn god done in mosaic at Calakmul. And I'm trying to make a painting piece, and I'm also at home working on a simulated mosaic piece of this, so I have three different views. This is two different views of the same corn god at Calakmul. This is just a carving of a jaguar head. Of course, the jaguar is a major symbol in Mayan culture, just carved by some street vendor, has no basic historic value. This is the bat god, a sketch from a artist's work in a restaurant in Puerto Vallarta, just sketched off a wall mask piece. The bat is another symbol of the gods for Mexico. And then we totally turn the corner here, because this piece, that's actual human face. This is a mosaic tile, a Mayan type of mosaic tile face, just painted on a human face, much like the painted face you saw in the Halloween mask. So I've just cut the edge around it so you could just see it as if it were a Mayan mask, but it's a live human face. This is a Mayan ruler piece that was one of my attempts to do work in encaustic, which is a wax finish that is poured onto the surface of a piece. It's a Mayan ruler. Again, a very similar shape piece that appears many places in Mayan art. Some people in the Northwest may be familiar with this. Its title is She Who Watches, and it's part of a piece that you really can't get to unless you go with a tribal member somewhere in the eastern part of the Columbia River Gorge. And it's just an ink and color on wood, driftwood. But the original is part of a whole culture of art that is tribal controlled and not, very sacred to the peoples of the gorge. And so this is an attempt to make her, I just love the idea of she who watches, and like there's someone watching over that whole gorge and into northern Oregon, all the tribes that are in the northern part of Oregon around Mount Hood and so on. You're going to have to work your imagination with me a bit on this one. This started as a very small piece about that square rectangle, incarved, which intrigued me because most masks are protrude outward. This is an incarved piece. And it's from the Lackadan culture, which is in that jungle area at the point where Mexico is at the bottom of the Gulf and goes up to the Yucatan. And just inside from that lowest spot is an almost intact, primitive culture that lives there. And people are trying to preserve, working to preserve that culture. And so this is not exactly like the original. I may have put the original sketch on the back. Yeah, there's the original sketch on the back. Okay, so this is my interpretation of this Lackadan incised carving. I saw it, I visualized it as two friends. So I made my own interpretation of it, which means it's built up like two faces like this to each other, face to face, cheek to cheek. And so, as in many cases when I'm working off of Mayan art, I'm doing kind of my own interpretation of it, so it doesn't just it's not just a copy. Okay, it's an updating. And part of the reason I do this from the Mayan culture is because I love the Mayan culture, and I'm trying to make it more accessible to a Western audience. They're among the first peoples of the Americas. Their culture goes back to about 200 BC, maybe an offspring of the Olmec culture, but we're not sure. But from 200 BC to the conquest in 1619, the Maya culture was strong in that lower part of Mexico, off the high country of the Altiplano and around Mexico City, but down near the bottom of Oaxaca and into Palenque, that's all Mayan country. And I've seen many of the places that are, a large part of this imagery is Mayan. This small section is basically classical Christian. It started out as a larger piece of a clay head of Christ in sorrows on a driftwood cross, which is hanging at my house. My late wife said it was one of my best pieces, but she said it's so strong I can't have it in the house, I can't look at it. So I didn't put it as the centerpiece, but imagine a different piece in the center. This is simply a Holy Week head of Christ, which is very common among the ritual progressions and processions and so on of Mexico and Holy Week. But the figures around it were meant to be around this crucifix. The visitor from Ethiopia, the person screaming, he can save others, but he can't save himself, the kind of words that were said by the detractors of the cross. A disciple, an older woman, they were meant to be a beginning of a collection of people to be hung as masks around this central cross. But for this show, I put the different face in it. But to give a taste of how masks were used very commonly in not only early Christian art throughout the history of Christian art, but also in Christian festivals where people put masks on to be in Holy Week processions and that kind of thing. This is Tlaloc, the Mayan god of water, rain, and the underworld, one of the two most famous figures in the Mayan cosmology. And this one over here is the sun god, whose name I can never pronounce. And these are probably emblematic of the kind of art you would see all over Mexico, in faces, in stonework, in murals, mosaics, and so on. The sun god appears, you've already seen one in this show. The sun god or the fire god appears everywhere in Mexico, as does Tlaloc. They have different names among the Aztec Altiplano tribes, and they have different names in the Mayan and in the Olmec. So sometimes I'm trying to remember what the Tlaloc's name is, and I think Tlaloc is the Mayan name, and I don't remember the Aztec name for Tlaloc, the water god. This is simply a cover off of a Greenpeace magazine cover. And I did a little spiffing it up with a little bit of extra paint and some feathers and some things. But there's a whole art movement, especially on the west coast of the United States, where the debris that is collected by people who are cleaning the oceans, like Greenpeace and other groups, bring it to the shore, and there's a whole AmeriCorps movement to turn these pieces into works of art of all kinds, big whale pieces and sea-related pieces. So this was simply an example of a whole art movement that's very strong on the southern coast of Oregon, where the AmeriCorps has a headquarters, and they're using these pieces. And I've been to places where they've got a whole park full of these huge whale-like and ocean-like pieces that are made all from debris collected out of the ocean. Nets and all kinds of stuff. So I just thought it was a fun use of recycling of materials, and it deserved to have a space in the show. Want me to cut it? This is an African mask. I love it. It's one of my favorite pieces in my collection. And I'm not sure where my wife and I got it, but it deserved to be in the show. I have literally no knowledge of who the artist is or where my wife and I picked it up years ago. But it's done in what's called raku style, which is done in a furnace where you take the clay and you put it in with weeds and debris and wood and grasses, and it burns on this raku clay. That's how you get, if you see an iridescent thing in a clay piece, it's probably done the raku method. So it's a method, but I just love this piece. I put this section together calling it personas or theatrical because unlike some of the other shows you've seen, or especially the Christian section, many of the works here are unreal figures. They're figures that do not exist. The Green Man does not exist as a person, okay? It's a type, an archetype. But this section is more like the classical section of the Christian art because every one of these masks has a figure, a real figure behind it. And that's what distinguishes this section from even the next section you're going to see. The two key pieces here from Islanders, this was done by Rick Sievers on Island, and he calls it Then and Now. So in other words, it's how he sees himself as a mask back when, or how he sees himself now as a different person. So he's comparing a past and present of his life through the form of the mask. Okay. This figure is from Oaxaca, Mexico. It's part of a Zapotec ruler series in the San Domenico Museum at the St. Dominic's Church. Done in a type of hammered metal, hammered gold, and it's actually a pectoral piece. It's to be worn on the chest. It's just one style of art that the Aztec or Mixtec Altiplano, high plains area around Mexico City were proficient in. But in the same place in Mexico City, they've been doing a lot of excavating over the years, and this is the Birdman in the new, probably a couple of decades old now, museum at the south end of the Zocalo in Mexico City. So you got the cathedral, then you got a big open excavation area you can actually walk through. Then you go into the museum, and this is one of the figures, the Birdman. It's a photo that I took, and he appears in the museum. So these are pieces found in the excavation of the many layers of the Montezuma Temple, which was there when the conquistadors came in 1519 and eventually made it to Mexico City and started robbing from Montezuma's temple to build the cathedral. And so we don't know how many layers are here, but they think there's at least 10. They're down now to the 7th layer, and they find they can't go any further because the whole thing will collapse. It'll just fall apart. So they're going to stop where they are. They know there's 3 more layers that could be excavated, but maybe someday the technology will be there to do it. But it's a big open pit, and you can walk through and see the different layers of the Montezuma dynasty over the years prior to 1519. And of course, you probably know the story of what the Spanish and conquistadors did to Montezuma and his dynasty. This particular piece I put in the show because a friend of mine did this, an Eastern artist. She calls it the eye of the artist. So it's like a hidden face just behind a knothole. Very unpretentious, but just fun. This is the old man from a dance that's traditionally Mexican. I'm not sure what province, but old men wear this pink mask. They're all alike with these white robes, and they have a cane, and they kind of toddle around doing this prescribed dance. It's a traditional dance of Mexico. So this is simply bought off the shelf in a shop in Mexico. This is a 4th century BC in Turkey, remnants of an excavated mask of the Pan-Dionysus, or the Bacchanalia culture. So that culture used masks a lot for their Pan or Dionysus figures. This piece is a traditional tragedy mask, often used in the theater, the comedy and tragedy mask side by side. There's a cedar mask. I'm going to try this on. When Leo came, this is Leo Osborne's piece, when Leo came in wearing this, I didn't recognize him at first. Even though the eyes were wide open, it was Leo, but somehow this just added a dimension that was almost totally successful in disguising the face. This is one of my favorites. As we got into this whole authoritarian bit in our country, I felt I had to make a mask that went with this. So I call this one, it's made over an egg crate. It's the only thing I've ever made on top of an egg crate. You know, the pieces and shaping them different ways and using clay paper. I call it My Favorite Despot, or The Evil Face of Power. There's another one here, done years ago. This is Herod at the Massacre of the Innocents. And I title that one, We Imagine Ourselves to be Kings. You know, like we have control over, we can control anything. So this is looking at power through the perspective of mass. This is just a little Mayan parrot sketch. It's a mosaic piece like you've seen some already. And this one is from our Northwest culture. I call it The Happy Slave. It's a sketch from a wood sculpture at the Museum of Anthropology in Vancouver, which has 2 of these figures bearing a beam. They're down on their hands and knees bearing a beam. Behind it, they're pulling a cart of a huge, I call it a kahuna, or a big chieftain of some kind. And I'm saying if the native peoples ought to be worried about people appropriating native art, they should be really upset about this one, because here is their own people of another tribe being enslaved by a different tribe, and they're all Northwest native peoples. And it's interesting that, to me, I call it the happy slave, because whenever you see a lot of slave reproductions, whether you see it in a museum anywhere in the New World, which is depicting the slave trade, the slave is often happy. You know, it's always seen as the happy slave. You know, the dancing Negro in the South and that kind of thing. You know? These are two pieces. This is part of a Halloween mask, a devil mask, which is very common in most kinds of cultures to show the devil in some form. So this would be for a procession. And this is a mask of greed, the second deadly sin. It shows the massing of property, the gold for eyes, and the garbage coming out of the mouth. And of course, painted green. Yanni Young is a member of our church who brought these from Mexico. They're carved on very soft wood. This is almost like holding nothing, it's so lightweight. But there's a series of Costa Rican carved nature masks that she loaned to the show, which depict the butterflies and the toucans and the figures of her native Costa Rica. They're decorative masks. These are not meant to be personages, they are meant to be wall decorations, okay? There's a whole genre of masks that are just meant to decorate a wall, not meant to represent anything, be a ritual piece or be used at some kind of an event, but just because you like the image. This cluster of 4 masks of the 4 seasons was done by Lynn Prewitt of our church, and it shows she just took basic Michael's store kind of masks and just built over them with collage and tissue paper and net and so on, and captured the feeling of the 4 seasons. Again, they're decorative, they're probably not meant to be, they might be able to be worn. I think you could actually probably, yeah, they're masks, very small masks that you can buy in stores. I showed at the beginning on how to make masks, but these are intended to be decorative, not to be in any kind of procession. But I think you could use them in some kind of a dramatic setting. Okay. This is a clay paper mask. I call it Sphinx Guardian, or it's kind of trying to capture the royal themes of Egyptian Egypt. It's not meant to be an Egyptian mask. It's meant to be capturing the feel of what Egypt feels like to most people. This shadow and light mask is made by the wife of Rick Sievers. Heather did this, I think, trying to capture a feeling maybe of her own personality. I've not asked her about this, but she calls it shadow and light. These 2 masks are masks that are done trying to capture a feel of Northwest native art in this area, from here to Vancouver and up the coast. And they're not meant to be a particular ritual or anything, they're just capturing the feeling of the feathered headdresses and the way the bones are used to collect the hair and the paintings and the earpieces and so on. But they're not meant as any kind of disrespect of native culture, but just to say these are done in a style reminiscent of our Northwest native brothers and sisters. I hope it's perceived as respectful and not in any way derogatory. This is another Halloween mask Carol Steffi did. That's also another decorative piece to go on a wall. Okay. This last small section is just 3 different versions of the lion, tiger, jaguar series. The tiger, this was made as a part of a Halloween costume, where the whole costume is a jaguar pelt. So it's a wearable Halloween mask. Could have been in the Halloween part of the show, but this is done in a style reminiscent of much of the painting style that is current in Mexico City. If you go down there today, you will see many muralists and painters of figurative stuff that use this multiple bright colors. I've seen huge metal horses in the Zocalo of Oaxaca, painted like this. So I just, of course, had to try one, you know, because I like the effect of how you can just still capture a feel by multiple color uses. And then this is made in clay paper, and then there's pieces of driftwood put on as kind of earpieces. So it's a purely decorative mask. And this is a piece done in bas-relief by a friend of mine, Daniel Ortega, who comes up every summer and works with me, and we do bas-relief work. And he works with hemp fibers to create these low reliefs that he does in wild painting forms. But this is his interpretation of a lion. So the whole point of the show was to try to help people appreciate and draw their own conclusions from what these masks say to them, whether they're an indigenous piece, a Christian piece, a theater piece, a decorative piece. But it should give you a feel for the great variety of masks used throughout history through different cultures. We could go into Asia and Africa, of course, in great extent, but that was way beyond the scope of this show. But I hope you appreciate some of the ways that masks try to interpret our culture and try to give us pleasure and give us something to think about and maybe learn something from the insights and the views of another culture.
Thank you very much, Bob.
That's it.
Mm-hmm.